Joining me now to discuss this wild week in America, and maybe we'll get to Europe as well, Jeffery Sachs, the economist who serves as director of Columbia University's Earth Institute. Peter Schiff is an economist, businessman, and author who recently ran for Senate on the Republican ticket in Connecticut. Peter Orszag was President Obama's first budget director. He is now a Citibank executive and a columnist for Bloomberg. And Katrina Vanden Heuvel is the editor and publisher of The Nation magazine. Welcome to you all. So the first thing we have to talk about inevitably is the Supreme Court ruling, and none of us are constitutional scholars. So the question I would ask is, politically, Katrina, does it help Obama? Because you can see both arguments. Does it help Obama, or does it energize the Tea Party?
I think on balance, it helps Obama. It's a victory for Obama. It's a victory for American people. It's a victory for the forces who've been fighting for a sane health care policy for this country, human, moral. I think it also helps with the legitimacy, leadership of his presidency, because that was a question. And it helps in the sense of the renewed priorities, because this president, if he gets out there and makes the case, explains provisions that show even Republicans, when it's broken down, like this plan, he needs to get out there and make the case. Sure, it'll energize the Tea Party, but they're energized anyway. Will it help marginally with the independents, who seem to be the savior and key to this election? I think so, if he gets out there, as the Democratic Party needs to, and explain provisions, pre-existing conditions. Being a woman is no longer a pre-existing condition. Your kids can stay on your health care plan. This is the kind of America millions want to live in.
Peter, I take it you didn't like the ruling, but on the politics of it, do you think it will energize the Tea Party?
Probably. I think it gives you more of a reason to support Romney. If your goal is to get rid of Obamacare, the Supreme Court didn't do it, and now we have to do it legislatively. But, you know, this is not the kind of America I want to live in, and I would disagree. You don't need to be a constitutional scholar to recognize this is a terrible decision. It diminishes individual rights. And listen to what the Supreme Court said. They said that Congress doesn't have the power to force us to buy something, but they can tax us if we don't. That is a distinction without a difference. And I think more importantly, if you want to label this a tax, it is unconstitutional on its face, because this is a direct tax on American citizens who don't buy health insurance. The Constitution says it must be apportioned. This is an unapportioned direct tax. It is constitutional. If the Supreme Court is now saying that the Constitution doesn't apply and the federal government has unlimited taxing powers, then it's a real sad day in American history, because what it means to be an American has been irreparably changed. And by the way, this is a disaster for health care, for the economy. It's going to cause insurance rates to go up. Health care is going to be more expensive, not less. This is not good economics. It's not good policy, and it's clearly unconstitutional.
Peter is one of the authors of the healthcare plan. What do you think the net effect will be?
Well, look, actually, there's some very exciting developments that have been happening. Healthcare costs over the past 3 or 4 years have decelerated dramatically, and I don't think it's all because the economy has been weak. We are moving away from fee-for-service payments. We are moving towards a digitized healthcare system. The dividing lines between providers and payers are eroding, and that's all good. So
there are provisions in the healthcare bill that will accelerate this?
That will continue to encourage it, but that's where I think the focus should be. We need to continue that progress. If we don't move away from the fee-for-service system, we will not succeed in continuing to slow healthcare cost growth, and we will all be better off if we succeed in that effort.
What do you think, Jeff?
I agree completely with what Peter just said, and with Katrina. This is a good decision for the American people. It brings us to a fairer and more normal state, and it also creates a basis for getting our healthcare costs back under control. We're moving more towards the kinds of systems that other countries have, which cover everybody and keep the costs down. We have a system which is, quote, most market-oriented. What do we get for it? The worst coverage and the highest prices. And the kinds of things that Peter helped to put into this legislation are going to make a difference.
You have to understand why health care is so expensive right now. It's because of government. We've got to get government out of health care. We've got to have individuals buying their health insurance the same way they buy auto insurance, life insurance, fire insurance. We don't have problems there.
Why do all the other countries have more coverage at lower cost and better
Just
outcomes
because other countries,
and more government.
Just because other countries make mistakes doesn't mean we should emulate
The
them.
mistake
doing
is,
well.
my point is that their outcomes are better than ours, and you want us to go even farther away.
I want to go back
we
to the way
tried your way.
No, we haven't. We did try it my way a long time ago, and it worked great. We had a much better health care system
When did it
that was
work
more
great,
accessible
Peter? When was
before
that?
the government stuck its nose in.
Give me
Before
some-
the government got
To go
involved.
back to the
To
healthcare
what?
system of when exactly?
Yeah.
Well, before we had Medicare and Medicaid,
So you
before
would
we
rather live with-
had a tax code that.
Hold on. You
Yeah.
would rather live with the healthcare system in the 1950s than the one that you have access to today?
I don't want the technology of the 1950s, but I want the free market of the 1950s. That would be a vast
All right,
improvement
let
on
me-
what we have today.
We've got to move on. I'm sorry, but I want to ask about the economy in general. You've been gloomy about this recovery from the start, and you, unusually for somebody who generally is thought of as left of center, you were critical of the stimulus because you thought it was too much fueling consumption, not enough fueling investment.
Well, I thought that it was fueling the deficit, but not really providing much of a lift, and also not a lift when it was going to count, which is the medium term. Unfortunately, the administration used its ammunition in the first couple of years, and here we are, the fourth year, a weak economy, not going anyplace, and feeling a lot of headwinds. So I would have rather seen a strategy that built out our infrastructure and that improved training and education, skills, and many other things over a decade perspective rather than putting everything up front. And I think we're in the situation right now where we don't have ammunition right now and the economy remains weak. And the headwinds are not only internal, the kind that comes from this deleveraging process. They're not only, unfortunately, coming from Europe, which is the biggest mess in the world, but now they're coming from slowdowns in the emerging economies as well. So we're seeing a kind of synchronization of slowdowns almost everywhere in the world economy. It's rather dangerous.
A lot of the recovery, such as it has been fueled by exports, and so if those exports slow down, you have
What
a
strikes me
problem.
about this election is it's an extraordinarily important election, deeply ideologically polarizing. At the same time, some of the enormous issues of our time aren't fully engaged in it. A global economic crisis roiling the planet, what's going on in Europe, the campaign isn't fully engaging, maybe because it doesn't have the leverage. But I do think at the heart of it, Fareed, is that there is a kind of establishment consensus around some form of austerity, not growth. And unless this country, whether it's movements or electeds, treat joblessness as the greatest threat to our country, not deficits in the short term, joblessness will become the new norm in light of the structural economic problems.
Yeah, well,
and how we address that, how we address that
We've probably got a
becomes
3-1 here, so I have to let Peter get his view.
Well, first of
in.
all, I disagree that we even have a recovery. All we did is borrow more money and spent it. I think as a result, we're in a deeper hole. But I think our problems are self-made. I think the mess in America is bigger than the mess in Europe. We are less capable of paying our debts than Europe. We have more debt than they do. It's a bigger percentage of our GDP. And more importantly, when interest rates go up in America, they're about 7% right now in Spain, and the world is wondering if Spain can afford it. America can't afford 7% interest rates. We're actually less able to pay that than is Europe or Spain, and that's going to happen. And you're talking about creating jobs. You know, we're not going to create jobs by creating government, by expanding consumption or deficit spending. In order to create jobs, we need to get the government out of the way of the economy. We need more capital formation. We need more savings. We need more production, which means we need less government. We need fewer regulations. We need less government spending. If we're simply going to expand government, we're going to destroy the economy, and we might get jobs.
One of the main things, briefly, Fareed, is public-private investment in infrastructure. Public-private. Who could be opposed to that?
All right,
I can.
we're going to have to take a break because we're going to come back and see if there's any agreement on Europe. We can't agree on America. We will try and see if we can agree on Europe when we come back. And we're back with Jeffery Sachs, Peter Schiff, Peter Orszag, and Katrina Vanden Heuvel. If you look at countries that have their own central banks, which means that they have the ability to print money, none of these countries are having any trouble borrowing. That is Britain, Sweden, Japan, the United States, Switzerland.
The
only countries that are having trouble are countries whose debt is effectively denominated in a currency they don't control.
For now. But, you know, you live by the printing press, you die by the printing press. The fact that we can print money isn't a panacea. That's going to make it worse, because eventually our creditors are going to realize that getting paid back in money that has little value is the same thing as not getting paid back at all. And I think it would be a mistake for Europe to follow our bad example. You know, we're going to pay a heavy price for our quantitative easing and our bailouts. What Europe needs to do is solve these problems, not kick the can down the road. Now, Europe actually has the resources to make that mistake. I don't think we do. You know, a lot of people think that we're suffering in America right now because of the problems in Europe. Actually, that's the best thing we got going for us right now, because people are so worried about Europe. They're buying dollars. They're buying treasuries. That's keeping interest rates artificially low. That's keeping consumer prices lower than otherwise would be the case. But when Europe finally confronts its problems, right or wrong, you know, whether it pushes them down the road and makes them worse or deals with them now, the spotlight is going to move to America. And we don't have the kind of time that Europe does.
I mean, we have a Federal Reserve. We have a central bank. To me, one of the great political dangers, looking out at Europe and what austerity has done, even to countries which control their own federal bank, like the UK, is what a Mitt Romney and a Republican Party determined to slash spending in the face of a weak recovery. What that could mean for this country. It is clear, putting aside our differences, that one of the grave needs is to put money in the pockets of people, consumers. How do you do that? Joblessness may be the best way to a job program to give people jobs. May be the best way to avert.
The government doesn't have any money.
Look at Spain.
Give people money without taking money.
But
we can couple this. The right approach, in my opinion, is a barbell one in which we are doing lots of deficit reduction that's not taking effect immediately, that's phased in over time.
That's when we need it right now.
And also a bunch of infrastructure and other investment up front to try to spur the economy. We could do both.
There is a basic point which I think we mostly agree on, which is at least looking over a period of several years, you have to get your books in order. And it raises the most fundamental point, and probably a point of pretty big disagreement between us, about at what level should we balance the books. Should it be all spending cuts? Should it be tax increases so that we can continue to do some kinds of spending? I think our biggest problem right now in this country is that the powerful political interests in both parties, actually, though especially in the Republican Party, are so controlling the tax cut side that we've gutted the corporate income tax, we're gutting the personal income tax, everything is moving offshore more and more, and so the amount that we're collecting at the federal level is near is basically historic lows over the last 60 years. Now it's about 16% of gross domestic product. We can't run a normal civilized country at this rate. And if we try to do that, we end up with the poor without any health care, people out on the streets, kids without an education. And that's where the Republican Party would take us. The Democrats, though, while the rhetoric is different, they also have powerful interests that are saying, don't go very far on that. So both parties are basically tax-cutting parties, and we are bleeding in that way. The difference of us is that we agree that the budget should come into balance, but I want rich people to pay something.
Let me look.
All right, you get a chance.
First of all, government spending right now is as high as it's been, and it's not just the spending. I own a business, and it costs me more to comply with regulations than I pay in taxes. So it's a burden on the economy to pay all these taxes and to comply with all these regulations. And the government sucks all the capital out of the economy by running these enormous deficits. The government doesn't have any money that it doesn't first take. And if the government takes money from the private sector and spends it, it destroys economic activity. It ultimately destroys jobs. We don't want jobs. We want stuff. We need more production, more supply, not more demand. Yeah, the government can put us all to work, but we'll have nothing to show for it.
How about some skills? How about some infrastructure? How about an energy?
That doesn't come from government. Meanwhile, the government...
Excuse me. We have public schools. We have children that need education.
And you're talking about the Federal Reserve. The Fed
I know now you want to go back.
The financial crisis.
You want no health care for the elderly. You want no public schools.
I want the market to supply, but the federal government is broke. Where's all the money going to come from?
Bring it back to the Supreme Court for a moment.
And for 30 seconds,
30 seconds.
We have to go.
We are living at a time of concentration of wealth, income, and political power we haven't seen since the Gilded Age and the robber barons. Corporate profits are at an all-time high in decades. So I think we need to take a measure of that. How do we limit that, end that, and rebuild a politics for the 99%?
And we're going to have to leave it at that. Peter Schiff, Katrina Vanden Heuvel, Peter Orszag, Jeff.